Now I want to talk about the group 1 intervals a little more in depth. So, as we know, in group 1, we have what? Perfect intervals, right? And we can only have a perfect unison, a perfect fourth, a perfect fifth, and a perfect octave. So you would never see a second being a perfect or a sixth. You would never have a perfect sixth interval since those are from group 2. So in group 2 is only major or minor, whereas group 1 is perfect. Well, with the perfect intervals, I can change them by extending the distance between each two notes or decreasing the distance between each note, and I would get a different sound from each interval. So if I have the perfect interval in the middle, if I increase the distance by a half step, I would get an augmented interval. So for example, if I have a perfect fourth and I add a half step in between, so I increase the distance by a half step, I would get an augmented fourth. Whereas if I have a perfect interval and I decrease the distance by half step, for example, a perfect fourth, then I would get a diminished fourth. So in group 1, I can have perfect, augmented, or diminished. So for example, let's take perfect fourth. So here's perfect fourth, and I'll play a melodic. Now if I raise the distance between the two notes by a half step, I would get an augmented sound, an augmented fourth. So here it is in harmonic. And then here it is melodic. Then let's go back to the perfect fourth. Now if I decrease the distance by a half step, I would get a diminished fourth. So here it is. And that's what a diminished fourth sounds like. Now let's look at it on paper. So as you can see, the first one is a perfect fourth. So I have G to C. The distance is a perfect fourth. Then if I increase the distance, so in this case I took the top note C, and if I raise it by a half step it becomes a C sharp. Now my perfect fourth has become an augmented fourth because distance has increased. So G to C sharp is now an augmented fourth. There's a couple of ways of writing it. You could write it with a plus in the number 4 or a capital A in the number 4. But for the purpose of this class, let's use the plus with a capital 4. The next example is the diminished fourth. So I have a G to C flat. If I lower the top note by a half step, I'm decreasing the distances between these two notes. Therefore, from a perfect fourth, I now have a diminished fourth. So I could have a same thing with the fifth as well. I could have a perfect fifth, then augmented fifth, or a diminished fifth, perfect octave, augmented octave, diminished octave. So this is how we have the different qualities in group 1. So in group 1 we have the 3 qualities: a perfect, a diminished, and an augmented.